Hello and welcome to this edition of the Beacon Hill Report. I'm Jim Marshall of the New Bedford Cable Network, and joining us for his turn in the seat this month, Chris Hendricks.
Jim, always a pleasure to be here.
Good to see you again.
Likewise.
We've got the it's fall. It's nice out.
It is.
And obviously there's an election coming up. You're fortunate, no opposition. So
correct.
But one of the things for you, obviously, is this is a change because on the ballot for this upcoming election, you will have a new district effective January.
Correct. So as many of you know now, my current district includes most of the north end of New Bedford, basically anything above Sawyer to Brayley Road, and then the whole town of Acushnet. Which in the town of Acushnet right now consists of about a third of the population of my district. So come January, the new lines will be, my district will be entirely in New Bedford. Basically from the Tarkin Hill area, well technically Branscombe Street, which is near just south of Normandan Junior High, all the way down to the Monty Park area of the city. So I'll have most of downtown. Representative Tony Cabral will still have a sizable chunk of it. But it's certainly a different flavor, if you will, of a district as opposed to the last two terms.
Do the issues change for you when you look at the districts?
Sure. Yeah, anytime you have a geographical change like that, especially rural versus city, right. Your priorities do tend to shift a bit. There are more different issues that people deal with and that just don't exist in Acushnet that some people deal with in New Bedford, particularly low-income folks, low-skilled laborers, that type of population. Which is, my background. That's the folks that I've represented in my professional career as a lawyer. So I think the district fits even more. It fits well as opposed to the last district, for sure, considering the issues that will probably be on the forefront.
There's a lot of business there. There's a lot of people.
Offshore wind.
Offshore wind, you're correct. Housing is probably going to be another huge issue. Again, not that it wasn't before,
right.
But it's a very condensed area. It's a condensed area, that's for sure.
It's very if you look at it on a map, you can. That's exactly what pops out at you. There's going to be a lot of those issues coming up, especially with with housing, particularly, and how it relates to the train. There's a lot, as you said, there's a lot of business, a lot more business activity in this new district than my old, having downtown. It's good because, over the last 10, 15, 20 years, downtown, as you know, has been revitalized through the efforts of the state delegation and the city. So hopefully we can continue that. I certainly witnessed it firsthand as a bartender at Cork for years and years.
So the district itself, there's a lot of, as we're talking about, there's a lot of those issues that are going to be important to people that obviously you haven't dealt with, well, you have dealt with, but you haven't dealt with in such a major way in the past here. So, the economy, as we talked about, housing, those are things that are going to have to really be on the forefront for you.
Yeah, and like I said earlier, with the district lines changing, political priorities, availability to resources, those are all variables that are going to change when my district is entirely in New Bedford. In Acushnet, you had more of a rural, as everyone knows, more of a
farming
rural,
issues you were dealing
farming
with.
issues, right? A lot of kind of nuanced issues, particular to Acushnet. So we'll have to shift gears a little bit. And we've already started doing that. and staffing up our New Bedford office and trying to make sure that all those issues that we talked about coming down the pike, whether it be housing because of the train or offshore wind, and making sure folks have access to that job market. Those are the types of things we'll probably be focusing on a lot.
And the waterfront itself is just so, the waterfront drives the economy for Greater New Bedford, really.
Yep.
And that's right in your alley now.
Yeah, and it's, like I said before, bartending at Cork from 2006 to 2015, I had a really good perspective on all the progress that the city and the state has made, especially the city and the state delegation, like Mark Montigny particularly, all the progress that has been made in downtown. So it's exciting that we're going to have a lot more development, a lot more activity along the port. So it's certainly exciting to have that in my new district.
I'm curious because so the election's coming up in November, and obviously there's all talk about safety and security and accessibility and all that. From your standpoint, obviously you're close to the election office in New Bedford because you have to deal with them, and you were in Acushnet. Small town, big city, different things. Mm-hmm. But from your standpoint, when you hear talk about just the elections in general, what are your thoughts? Do you feel that those people are doing a good job?
Yeah, listen, it's a function of government, so it's always susceptible to certain problems along the way. I think that we've done a good job here in Massachusetts. I haven't seen anything to indicate that there's any systemic problem with our voting systems, security or functioning or otherwise. So when we expanded accessibility to the ballot box with mail-in voting, early mm-hmm. voting, particularly, I think by the time when I ran my first race, there was no early voting for primaries. I think that we've changed that, and that was one of the things I ran on. And so we're proud in Massachusetts that we were able to do that. But certainly, if something comes down the pike, I think we should be ready to act if there's any type of discrepancies or vulnerabilities in our election system.
And seems to have been successful too. Like when you look at early voting, I know we had Manny DeBrito on recently from the election. It's 2 weeks before the general election, I know, mm-hmm. coming up, but people seem to like it. Yeah. And I know COVID obviously played a role in that, mm-hmm. but
kind of put a shot in the arm to that effort. You're right.
Right. Yeah. And now it seems like people want that. Yeah. Even without COVID, they want that.
It's convenience, and I think one of the jobs overall as a state legislator is to make your constituents, the people in your district's lives more convenient. And I think access to early voting, mail-in voting, I think does that. And anytime you have something that's made more convenient, obviously it's going to be, I think, have good poll numbers as far as people liking it.
So, do you worry about, from your standpoint as a candidate and elected official, the machines per se? People worry about the machines, and some people say, "Well, we should just go back to the old ballot and just hand it in," or whatever. Do you worry about that?
From what I'm told, from what I've seen, I don't have anything that jumps out at me. Obviously, it's a man-made construction, so any type of effort like that will be susceptible. I don't see anything particular that jumps out as far as machines or any type of functions of any type of gear that would election stuff that would jump out at you. But certainly election security should be our top priority. If you don't have that in a democracy, especially confidence, but you also have forces that degrade the election system for no reason at all without supporting any evidence. So I think that's more of a political strategy for a lot of folks. So I haven't seen anything in Massachusetts that would indicate any full systemic type of problems, machines or otherwise. But I'm certainly glad that we were able to expand the vote and not move in the opposite direction like some states are doing.
It seems, like I said, it seems popular here, mm-hmm. And I would imagine it could be popular elsewhere as well.
Right.
But
and people forget in the context of elections and especially election deniers and the whole thing with January 6th is that. There's a process. If you don't agree with something, there's a process to go do it, and I think that has been lost along the way.
As we talk about the election, obviously the governor's race, the attorney general race, there's obviously statewide races. There's ballot questions I know that are people on, and I know we wanted to touch on a couple of those. The first one, the millionaire's tax question, and the fourth one, which actually isn't in some of the booklets, and that is the driver's license for immigrants. Talk a little bit from your standpoint right now. Obviously those in a city like New Bedford kind of stand out.
Absolutely. So if you recall, Jim, the millionaire's tax was on the ballot in 2018, but then it got knocked off prior to the election because of procedural issues. With the SJC said it wasn't right because it was a constitutional issue. So that was off the ballot in 2018. We got elected in 2018, went to the legislature, and we've modified the constitutional issue so we can have that actual issue be on the ballot. One. And so what this, for those of you who don't know, this question would raise the surtax on income above $1 million yearly, household income, from 5%, which it already is, to 9%. And so that would include anything that counts as income. If you sold your house, and let's say you only make $100K a year, and you sell your house, and for some reason you're over $1 million, that would apply. So I know this a lot. People I've talked to about this issue, about this question, there's been some concern about whether or not, if I sell my house, stuff like that will count. Whatever is counted as income. And so that money, as it pertains to the ballot question, is going to be earmarked for education and transportation. It's expected to bring in about $2 or $3 billion in annual revenue, if that were put into place. And so, so the idea is that education and transportation are the two things that are going to benefit from the money that will be generated from that.
And of course, the devil's advocate says, well, but they've earned that money. Some people have worked hard; they've earned that money. They do what they need to do, and they feel they pay their fair share too. How do you respond to that? Because I'm sure that you've talked to people who are friends of yours who've said, listen, I'm getting hurt by this.
Yeah, I mean, from the reports and the data that has been generated from this indicates that only about 0.7% of people will be affected, of taxpayers will be affected by this law. And it's about 24,000 or so people. It's no one wants to pay taxes, but to live in a modern, civilized democracy, especially when we have education that is struggling. We put another $1.7 billion with the Student Opportunity Act, and that's going to help. But I think the more money we can get earmarked for that, the better. For those who say that it's gonna, it's $1 million. That's quite a bit of money, and so it only starts, that extra surcharge would only come after once you start earning your second $1 million. So I think that's fair from my point of view, especially considering the district that I'm in. Also, it's going to be a sizable amount of money, and so we can't ignore that. I think, especially with transportation being such an important issue, particularly this area, that we can get some money for those two areas.
Do you worry though that those that are the millionaires who are business people, perhaps, who own businesses, will say, you know what, it's not worth it, I'm going to go to another business-friendly state, in their opinion? I mean,
I don't see that happening necessarily. Obviously, you hear that a lot, that's one of the things. I just don't see it. There's about, they say people who make about $5 million a year will be the ones who are going to be affected by this. It's about 70% of the people who will be affected by this law make over $5 million a year. And so it's going to affect a very slim margin of taxpayers. So I think it's a suitable thing to do for sure.
The other question, I know that's especially important in this area, is the immigration driver's license question that has been put on the ballot at the last minute too. I mean, they got the signatures and they did the process right. But I know, like we talked about with me, they didn't even make the book for some of the people that got their Commonwealth voting book. But it seems, I mean, I know that there seems to be a lot of support for it. It obviously passed the legislature.
It's as it stands, it's set to be in place. Yep.
So
in July, I believe.
Yeah. So this vote is going to be, I don't know. I
Yeah.
don't know how it works.
Yeah, to be honest, I haven't seen the polling on how it's going to go either way. I haven't heard much or seen much reporting on any indication how the vote's going to land. I certainly will be voting to preserve that statutory provision for folks. It doesn't take into account their immigration status when they're going for driver's license. I think it's going to make roads safer. I think it's going to encourage more people instead of if you don't have a license, and not even including immigrants. It's going to put more people trained on the road than otherwise. So I think that's going to have a positive effect. There's a lot of it's a very hotly.
Well, you got people concerned. First of all, I mean, obviously they're concerned. Why are these people here in the country anyway? They're illegal in many cases. Are they going to be able to vote? They still think that you still got the opponents. I'm sure that you hear there. Well, these people are going to register to vote, and they shouldn't be voting. Which isn't part of the provision anyway, but the perception is that's what's going to happen.
Yeah, that will not happen because in the argument there, it's because it's going through the RMV that they could likely be registered to vote, which doesn't happen because just now our RMV process deals with people who can't vote, people who are under 18, people who who are felons who lost the right to vote. So that I don't think is folks who take that position. I don't think it's a very credible position. I think what it's going to do to insurance rates, it'll probably lower insurance rates, and have more. When you have more people insured, it's going to be good for the insurance system, and just create safer streets. And you still there is some misinformation about whether we're just letting illegal immigrants come in and take. You still have to be documented. You still have to have two forms of unexpired identification, whether it be a consular ID or another form of ID. So we're making sure that those, if you say you are who you say you are, is the phrase that when this bill was first discussed, that Governor Baker had an issue with that.
Right.
Like people coming in not confirming who they are. We fixed that before we passed it with an amendment, and Bill Strauss was a big proponent of that. So thankful for the work he did on that. So we think that this bill is it was well written. It considers has all the concerns addressed that we discussed when we went through the legislative process. So I'm certainly for this, and I hope it passes. Especially considering my district. My district come January will be a majority minority, right. Meaning that demographically speaking, there are more minorities than otherwise. So I think and when I go to these neighborhoods, which is where I live, these folks are hardworking folks, and if we can make it easier to get to work, to pick up your kid, to go to the grocery store, that embraces them into the community. It makes them more of a part of the community. And right now, that with being boxed in and not be able to travel, not be able to move around, kind of isolates folks a bit. And that question is going to be I guess my question is technically how does that work? Because the legislature, the governor signed it, obviously the bill that you folks passed. Oh, the governor. Well, we overrode the veto.
Correct. Yep. So I'm curious as to how, if that's going to go into effect July 1st, so this vote could change.
I think this
I guess technically, how does that work?
It just negates the law.
Okay.
Yeah, it would stop it from going into effect, essentially. Now, I mean, the other side is that I think, would we want to go change that as a legislature if it was knocked out, by the vote? So I don't know if there'll be much appetite to do that. It'll obviously depend on what the numbers are.
Oh yeah, I guess I've never seen this situation that I can recall before. Something passed, and then you're right after you pass it, you're looking to repeal it.
And it's kind of it's kind of an odd thing. I certainly have no experience with something like passing something and then have it be on the chopping block.
Less than a year later.
Yeah, I think if it passes, it would be more vindication for what we did in the legislature, and the work that we did on it. So I think it'll be fine. I think the law will stay in place. I hesitate to say no or yes. I don't know how the question's worded, and I apologize on that. But certainly keeping that law in place that we passed this session is going to, especially in New Bedford, especially if you're in the city of New Bedford and you want to have a more inclusive community, a more community that has more people in it and is safer that way. I think we'll be a lot better off.
One of the things you were talking to me off camera about before we came in is one of the bills that's really being talked about is the economic bill. That you guys...
It's a topic of discussion.
You guys seem to have been making progress and then kind of halted. But you're saying that obviously the talks are still going. What does it look like right now?
So just so people know, the economic development bill that the House passed was a $4 billion package. It was, some of it was bonding, some of it was appropriation. And so the appropriation stuff that was in that bill included $500 million for tax relief, just payments to taxpayers in Massachusetts. That cap, again, it was about $500 million, and that was from if your income was $38,000 to I believe $100 for an individual, and then $150 for a couple or married couple. Then you get either $250 or $500. And so that piece, as it relates to the 62F piece that the governor brought up with the tax breaks back to people, that is a little bit of a discrepancy. So that's the issue that they're trying to work out. I have, from what I'm hearing, from the discussions I've had, it does indicate that the bonding piece probably we'll probably have to do again at some point. But the appropriation stuff, if there are amendments to it, even in the process with leadership, that we still could get it through formal session. It's a precarious situation because if one person objects,
Correct.
then the whole thing gets thrown away. We have to go to next year. I read an article today about the GOP side and their thoughts. It doesn't appear that they're going to challenge or anything. They're obviously involved with leadership and how, because the leadership has an interest in having them involved because they don't want anyone coming and objecting. So balancing how we're going to get that 62F money out to people as it relates to that 500 we already appropriated, that's what they're figuring out. It looks as though, when Governor Baker brought that up, that we're going to be getting about $3 billion back to us. That assessment has been confirmed by the auditor. I think it was closer to 2. And then there was another report by a more of a progressive nonprofit group that had that way lower. So I don't know what at the end of the day what it's going to look like. But if that 62F provision went into effect as the governor would like, there are people who are set to get millionaires. We get $22,000 checks, $25,000 checks from the government over this fall or next year. So I think there's a lot of things to be concerned with there, and so we'll see. But I'm something will happen.
Do you think it'll happen this year though, or do you think it's going to go?
I think so. I think it could. There are some progressive groups. There was a progressive group, led by Rep. Mike Conley up in Boston, who filed a bill that would cap that money you get from 62F at $6,500, as opposed to getting checks for $10,000 and stuff, to kind of get in with the remainder, kind of distribute that evenly amongst the people who don't get capped out. So that's what that function of that bill would do. I don't know if that's something that House leadership is interested in doing. That would probably get someone to object at some point if they put something like that in. So we'll see. I mean, it's a lot of money. It's some groups say 1.5. Some people are saying 2.8 billion coming back to us.
Yeah, the number I've seen most of the time is about 2. I guess.
So we'll see. I'm confident something will happen by the end of the year. There has been some talk about, and this is kind of, I'm learning this on my feet as well, about coming back into session, because we're not in session.
Correct.
According to the rules. So the flip side of that argument is, why don't you just, if someone objects, just call a session, come back in, which on its face seems pretty reasonable. But I guess there would be, even from both sides, that there would be pushback from doing that, because rules are rules.
Right.
The chamber has, as a body, has a set of rules that we should adhere to. So the public is aware of how the process goes. And then moving forward into the future, what constitutes something urgent enough to call people back into session. So we'll always have that debate. So I don't think there's any appetite to have any formals this year. If anything does get done, it'll be informal, and it won't be regards to any appropriations. And that's a big thing for me, because I had two big earmarks in that economic development bill with the Brooklawn Street lighting. There's plans in Brooklawn Park to get the ball fields, the flooding there, the water mitigation, flooding mitigation worked out, as well as the lighting. That money I got was like $250,000 for the lighting of Brooklawn Park, and then I got another $100 for the Girls Design Academy after school program. So those are all in limbo right now.
Right.
So I'm hoping at the end of the day, at the end of this year, that money will be where it needs to go.
We got a couple minutes left, but I wanted to ask you too, and we were chatting about it. Obviously, with the new district, you're going to be, the train's coming to New Bedford. Looks like next fall, as you were saying, all indications point to 2023. This is going to happen, and people seem excited about it. You talk to people in town; they seem excited about the prospects of it. I'm wondering, from your assessment, as a state rep. I mean, the MBTA's been criticized. They've been reports. The NTSB came and had a negative report on them. So how do you temper the excitement of the train coming back to New Bedford versus the performance of the T recently?
Yeah. As you stated, that MBTA is in the news a lot, with especially just the stairs, the infrastructure issue alone, that professor died on the MBTA stairs. So there's a lot, and I've represented, in my professional work as a lawyer, I've represented a lot of MBTA workers, so no one knows how dysfunctional the MBTA can be. So I mean, certainly it's not my area of expertise, over the last couple sessions. I know Bill Strauss has been on the forefront about holding the MBTA accountable. I think something needs to be changed. I think better oversight, certainly. We could have better oversight at the MBTA. Hopefully those issues will all be worked out by the time the MBTA comes down here, by and large. But that's a little bit of wishful thinking. But I don't see how this, having the MBTA, the commuter rail coming down into Bedford and Fall River will exacerbate or alleviate any of those problems. Right. If anything, it will probably make them worse. But what we're concerned about in New Bedford as it relates to the MBTA coming in is the district, housing, the local economies, how that's going to be affected, because that's a big deal.
Yeah.
You go into a town outside of Boston that has the MBTA, you feel that energy. It's a lot more congestion, it's a lot more economic activity, a lot more people. Lot more working class folks, low income folks. So we'll have some challenges, with the train coming down, particularly with gentrification. We talked a little bit about that off the air. That's a big issue. On the housing committee, I've seen and heard testimony and read tons on the effects of how that can all fall into place. So there are bills. There will be bills refiled come next session, relative to rent control, things like that. I don't know if that's particularly the way to go. I certainly think that rent stabilization is something we need to look at, because there are people in the city who are saying, I've been paying $500, $600 a month, and now the next month they want to start paying $1,400. Right. And so we need to make sure that folks who are living in this community and part of this community don't get priced out of it. We can't be letting people get priced out of New Bedford.
Right.
Boston maybe, but not here at home.
Good seeing you.
Likewise.
A lot on the table. I appreciate it.
Yes, it's a lot to look forward to until the end of the year with elections and political issues.
Well, so we'll see you. We'll have you back very soon, I'm sure.
Look forward to it.
Thank you. That's going to do it for this edition of the Beacon Hill Report. I'm Jim Marshall of the New Bedford Cable Network. Thanks for watching, and we'll talk to you again soon.
150 over 90.
180 over 111.
160 over 110. I had a stroke.
This is what high blood pressure looks like. You might not feel its symptoms, but the results from a stroke are far from invisible or silent. If you've come off your treatment plan, get back on it, or talk with your doctor to create an exercise, diet, and medication plan that works for you. Go to loweryourhbp.org.
If I would have followed a treatment plan, I would not be in this situation.